Family reunions are supposed to bring joy, reconnecting with loved ones over laughter, stories, and food. But for me, one reunion marked the end of my world as I knew it. What I thought would be a day filled with warmth and nostalgia turned into the moment I lost the two people I trusted most: my wife and my brother. We had arrived early at my parents' house. The air was filled with the scent of grilling meat, kids laughing in the distance, and the familiar chaos of family gatherings. It felt good to see everyone after so long. I helped my dad with the grill, while my wife charmed her way through the crowd, her smile lighting up the room as always. My brother showed up a bit later, as energetic and charismatic as ever. The first part of the day felt normal, but then I started noticing things. My wife and my brother, who had always been close, seemed different. Their interactions felt charged, with lingering glances and touches that were hard to ignore. At first, I brushed it off, convincing myself I was imagining things. Then, in one devastating moment, my suspicions were confirmed. I caught them behind the shed, locked in a kiss that shattered everything. My wife, my brother, together. The shock was paralyzing. My heart pounded, my stomach churned, and the world blurred around me. What came next was even worse. When I confronted them, my wife didn't apologize. Instead, she blamed me, saying I'd been distant, accusing me of ruining her relationship with my brother. And my brother? He stayed silent, his guilt written all over his face. This betrayal didn't just hurt, it changed me. It broke me in ways I didn't think were possible. The two people I thought I could always count on turned out to be the ones who destroyed me. The days after discovering their betrayal were a haze of anger and disbelief. I couldn't think straight. I packed a bag and left the house without a word, needing space to breathe, to process what I had seen. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of them together flashed in my mind. It was a cruel loop, one I couldn't escape. My wife, the woman I'd loved for 8 years and married for 5, didn't even try to deny what had happened. Instead, she doubled down on her accusations. She claimed that I had neglected her, that I hadn't been attentive enough, as if any of that could justify what she'd done. She called it a mistake, but refused to acknowledge the depth of her betrayal. The audacity of her blaming me for the destruction of her so-called relationship with my brother was almost laughable. And my brother? The silence from him was deafening. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't try to explain himself. It was as if he had resigned himself to being the villain in this twisted story. Or maybe he didn't care enough to defend his actions. Either way, his betrayal cut the deepest. He wasn't just a sibling. He was someone I had trusted with my life. As I replayed the events in my head, I began to see the cracks I had ignored. My wife and my brother had always gotten along well, maybe a little too well. They had inside jokes, shared laughs, and an ease around each other that I'd chalked up to their personalities. I thought their bond was innocent, something to be grateful for. But now, I couldn't help but wonder, how long had this been going on? Were there moments in the past when I should have seen the signs? The reunion itself had been full of red flags I'd dismissed. The way they lingered in conversations, how their laughter seemed a little too private, a little too intimate. I'd even caught my wife brushing something off his shirt at one point, her hand lingering on his shoulder just a second too long. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But now, it was impossible to unsee the truth. The aftermath of their betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was logistical chaos. The house we shared became a battlefield, though I wasn't sticking around long enough to fight. I stayed in a friend's spare room while I sorted through the mess of our life together. Divorce papers were filed almost immediately. She tried to reach out, sending texts and leaving voicemails, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. There was nothing left to say. Even worse than the end of my marriage was the complete severing of my relationship with my brother. We had grown up side by side, sharing everything from toys to secrets. Sure, we'd had our fights, but we always made up. This, though? This wasn't something you could fix with an apology or a handshake. His betrayal wasn't just personal. It felt like a betrayal of our family, our shared history. My parents didn't know what to do. They were caught in the crossfire, torn between their sons. I could see the pain in their eyes every time they tried to talk to me about it. They didn't want to take sides, But how could they not? How do you stay neutral when one of your children destroys the life of another? As for me, I went through every stage of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression. Acceptance was still a long way off. I questioned everything about myself. Had I been too trusting? Too blind to what was happening right in front of me? Should I have done something differently? The endless what-ifs haunted me. But here's the thing about betrayal. It forces you to confront truths you'd rather avoid. I realized that my marriage hadn't been as perfect as I'd convinced myself it was. My wife had always craved attention, and maybe I wasn't enough for her. But that didn't excuse what she did. Nothing could. And my brother? Maybe I'd put him on a pedestal he didn't deserve. Maybe I had ignored the selfish, careless side of him because I wanted to believe he was better than that. Through it all, there was one thing I held on to: the belief that I deserved better. Better than a wife who would betray me. Better than a brother who would stab me in the back. Better than a life built on lies. The weeks following the betrayal were defined by silence and separation. I left the house the day I caught them and didn't look back. Staying there, surrounded by memories of a life that now felt like a lie, was impossible. I moved into a friend's spare room, leaving my wife to live alone with the wreckage of what she'd done. My brother, true to form, kept his distance. There were no calls, no messages, no attempts to explain himself. Maybe he knew there was nothing he could say that would undo what had happened. Or maybe he didn't care enough to try. Either way, his absence spoke volumes. The days blurred together as I tried to piece myself back together. I focused on practicalities, filing for divorce, and meeting with a lawyer to divide assets. The marriage wasn't salvageable, and I didn't want it to be. It was clear that what I thought we had was never as solid as I believed. The papers felt cold in my hands, a stark symbol of the end, but they also brought a strange sense of relief. There was no pretending anymore. Dealing with family, however, was another story. My parents were devastated, caught between two sons they loved but couldn't reconcile. My dad tried to rationalize the situation, suggesting that forgiveness might be the only way forward. My mom, ever the peacekeeper, wanted to understand why it had happened, as if knowing could fix anything. Their attempts to mediate only deepened the divide. It was impossible for me to see their concern for my brother as anything but a betrayal of my own pain. Eventually, I agreed to meet with him, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to say my piece. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. He looked uneasy as I approached the table, his usual confidence replaced with something that resembled shame. For a moment, I wondered if he'd rehearsed what he wanted to say. When he finally spoke, it was a simple apology. "I'm sorry." The words fell flat. They felt rehearsed, empty. He offered excuses, that it wasn't planned, that it just happened. He said he didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, as if his intentions made any difference. The betrayal was the same. I didn't say much in response. What was there to say? No explanation could erase what he had done. I let him talk, his voice faltering as he tried to justify the unjustifiable. When he finished, I stood up and said only this: "We're done." I left without looking back, knowing there was no path to repair what he had broken. My wife, meanwhile, waged her own campaign to rewrite the narrative. Her texts came in waves, apologies one day, accusations the next. She blamed me for being inattentive, claimed I was distant, said I drove her into my brother's arms. Her desperation was transparent, her attempts to win me back increasingly manipulative. I ignored it all. There was no version of events where her actions were excusable. Despite her efforts, the divorce moved forward. Every meeting with a lawyer felt like a step closer to freedom, though the process itself was draining. Splitting assets and untangling finances forced me to relive the past, to confront the life we'd built and were now dismantling. Each item we divided felt like a relic of a time when I believed in us. Now, those memories were nothing but reminders of what I'd lost. Through it all, I tried to focus on rebuilding. I leaned on friends, reconnecting with people I'd drifted away from during my marriage. Their support was unwavering, a reminder that not everyone in my life would let me down. Work became a refuge, a distraction from the emotional chaos. I picked up old hobbies, poured energy into things that brought me even the smallest sense of accomplishment. But healing wasn't linear. There were moments when the pain came rushing back, triggered by a song, a scent, or a stray memory. The image of them behind the shed haunted me, a visceral reminder of what I'd endured. Yet over time, those moments became less frequent. The weight of their betrayal started to lift, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. By the end of it all, I knew one thing for certain: the life I had before was gone. But in its place, I was building something stronger. In the end, their betrayal left scars, but it also taught me lessons I couldn't ignore. I learned that trust, once broken, doesn't heal the way wounds do. It leaves marks that never quite fade, reminders of what was lost and what can never be regained. But I also learned that those marks don't define you. They don't dictate your future unless you let them. The divorce was finalized after months of draining back and forths. Seeing her name on that final document brought a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a sense of closure. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a fresh start, free from her lies and manipulation. My brother remained a ghost in my life, someone I once knew but would never know again. The bond we shared, one built over decades, was gone. Despite the heartbreak, I found strength in starting over. I began focusing on what mattered: my own happiness, my own growth. I leaned into friendships that had always been solid, relationships that reminded me what loyalty looked like. I took time to rediscover myself, to figure out who I was outside of being her husband or his brother. Looking back, I don't regret learning the truth. As painful as it was better than living in ignorance. That moment behind the shed shattered my world, but it also gave me the clarity I needed to rebuild. Slowly but surely, I'm learning to trust again, not in them, but in myself and the life I can create moving forward. If you've ever been betrayed like this, you know how hard it is to pick up the pieces. But you can. You deserve better, just like I do. Thanks for following my story. If you want to hear more about this journey and others like it, hit subscribe. I got plenty more to share.